Does anyone remember back in 2020, before Cyberpunk 2077 came out, and amidst the hype, seemingly no one cared when an anime adaptation was announced? The only thing that drew any attention to the project was that Trigger was animating it, which I think everyone agreed was a very interesting choice. And then 2 years without any info passed. Cyberpunk 2077 had been a disaster, the world had mostly healed from a worldwide pandemic, Russia's in the middle of invading a country, not much of interest has really happened. I think about a month and a half to 2 months before the first trailer for Edgerunners came out, I was actually looking into the project when I was doing research for a now scrapped panty and stocking video I was making. I was pretty confident that the show had been scrapped due to 2077's poor reception, and a high-profile studio like Trigger didn't want anything to do with it. Then, not long later, the first trailer for the show had released, not really showing anything compelling, other than Hiroyuki Imaishi's signature style, which I love. It actually wasn't until the Not Safe for Work trailer came out that I began to be interested and figured, why not? It's probably going to be terrible, so it will at least be something for me to laugh at. And then when the show came out, early reviews from IGN were very positive, which made me only more skeptical since IGN's history for what is considered good is about as accurate as saying that CNN is a trustworthy news source. So I watched the anime over the course of the week with my expectations low, and over that time the words anime of the year and masterpiece were synonymous with this anime. In my opinion, yeah, it's really good, but it's not that good. Spoilers ahead. Cyberpunk Edgerunners is about a teen named David Martinez living in Night City, a dystopian cyberpunk fan city of dreams. That, while pretty to look at, living in it is like being in the slums of Chicago 24/7. David is a recalcitrant yet intelligent student currently taking classes so that he can work for Arasaka, one of Night City's largest corporations. After getting expelled from school, his mother picks him up, but on the drive home gets into an accident ending with her death. Still mourning the loss of his mother, David makes a discovery that she was keeping a military-grade cybernetic enhancement called the Sandevistan that essentially turns anyone who wears it into Sonic. David has the device installed into him and eventually meets a girl named Lucy who takes interest in his new enhancement and gives him an offer to help her with some small-time theft gigs. One day while staying over at Lucy's, David gets jumped by a gang of lowlives, which I guess in the cyberpunk world are called Edgerunners. It turns out Lucy's a part of the gang and only wanted to keep David around because the Sandevistan was supposed to go to them because David's mother was their enhancement dealer. Before he gets killed, David is able to convince the Edgerunners to let him join their gang, and out of respect for his mother, they give him a chance. It's a pretty simple premise to a show, which isn't a bad thing, but it plays out exactly how you would expect in certain aspects. Does the main character get the girl? Yep. Does everyone in the crew like him? Yep. Does he eventually become the new leader of the gang? Of course. It's not like I wouldn't have wanted some of these things to happen, but the rate at which they happen is way too fast. David doesn't meet Lucy until the second episode, and by the end of the episode 4, they're in a relationship. It just makes the relationship between Lucy and David feel rushed, and even though they have a lot of chemistry later in the show, I couldn't help but roll my eyes at the end of the 4th episode. Sure, they had a couple interactions and he saved her like once or twice, but there is no real reason given to why Lucy even likes David. She seems like a very cold, distant person who doesn't attach to people very easily since she has moved around her entire life. So throwing them into a relationship is both rushed and goes against her character traits. Then there's everyone liking David. I'm fine with minimizing the character drama, but it's hard to believe that not a single person would take issue with him. Night City is a ruthless, cutthroat city where people get sold out and double-crossed constantly. And they just let him into the gang like it's no big deal. Like even Kiwi, whose whole philosophy is that everyone gets stabbed in the back eventually, doesn't take any big issue with David joining the crew. The lack of any conflict between David and the crew cheapens his relationship with the rest of the cast. which is a huge detriment since this show relies more on character dynamics more than anything else. There's a pretty large segment where there's a montage of David hanging out with the rest of the crew individually, which I guess is supposed to show him bonding with each member, but I would have much rather had seen him bond and become friends with one or two members over multiple episodes with more intimate and personal interactions. In episode 3, we could have had him befriend Pillar and Maine. Episode 4 could have been Dorio and Rebecca. Episode 5 could have been Kiwi. And then, all the way in episode 7, after the proper build-up, we could have had Lucy and David become an official couple. These issues didn't actively annoy me during the show, but once you are done watching it, it feels like it should have been the obvious direction to go. Ironically, Trigger repeated what I consider one of the biggest mistakes CD Projekt Red made with Cyberpunk 2077, and that's taking a bunch of interesting moments and shoving them into a montage. I would rather see a full episode of just character interactions and getting to know the characters better, instead of almost all the events of episode 5. And episode 5 isn't even bad, it's just there is so much action happening in the show at such a fast rate, a single episode to calm down and take in the more subtle and meaningful things in the anime would have been much appreciated and augmented the rest of the show. But like I said, this is only something I noticed after I was done watching the show, and is closer to a nitpick than a legitimate flaw. But I will say that the biggest mistake the show made was the time skip between episode 6 and 7. We go from a very serious, shocking event that will change the social dynamics of the whole crew and probably traumatize David to just another gig. What? Dorio and Maine just died. Are we not going to explore how the characters feel? How Kiwi and Rebecca reacted? Are we even going to follow up on how Kiwi was hospitalized by Maine? I would have liked to see if she held it against him or not. Then on top of that, Lucy left the gang. Another massive event that got completely skipped over. If we want this gang to feel like a family, we have to at least see the reaction from everyone when she made that decision. Especially David and Kiwi, since they are the ones closest to her. And perhaps the most unbelievable decision after the time skip is that David has gone from just the Sandevistan to being fully modded out with enhancements. You would think that it would be an obvious character trait for David to avoid overloading on enhancements after seeing a friend of his go insane after overmodding his body. But I guess the logic here is just to follow in the same exact footsteps. At the very least, we could have got a montage of events that led him to deciding which enhancements to buy. Maybe it's just me, but I like seeing what's going on through the mind of the main character when he is making a permanent alteration to his body. But enough about David, let's talk about Lucy. Lucy is the primary love interest of the show, and the obvious poster girl that the fans are supposed to love. And believe me, Trigger nailed it with her design, but her personality is all over the place. We begin with a Lucy who is obviously supposed to be the cool, nonchalant type, but then one event later she's making a rape face and screaming "let's go" as if she was a wannabe bra girl. Then 2 episodes later, she's the gentle, love-stuck heroine who doesn't want anything other than to be with David, but still doesn't trust him enough to be transparent. You could argue having so many personality traits makes her more real and less of a one-note stereotype, but when I watched the show, every time I saw her appear in a scene, I was thinking in the back of my mind, what personality is she going to pick this time? Her personality made it hard for me to care about her because it just felt like inconsistent writing for who she was supposed to be, other than just being cool, which she isn't even that good at doing since she eventually falls into the damsel in distress role anyway. But this probably isn't even the biggest issue I have with her. If her personality switching wasn't enough to bother you, her overall role in the show will. We actually get a backstory for Lucy, which feels out of place because no other character besides David gets one, which just makes it obvious they put too much faith in her being the designated poster girl. Candidly, I don't really care about a backstory for her character, and the rest of the characters did just fine without backstory, so when Lucy got one, it felt like it was being forced so the fans would like the character more. Then she has this entire side plot going on, which I had just such a hard time following, that it almost felt like they were trying to stuff a different show into a show that didn't have enough time to begin with, making her not only a more distant character, but more of an intrusive one at best. I rather would have had her stay a part of the group the entire time and had her character development happen with them instead of feeling like her story was just stapled onto the show. The synergy between Lucy and the rest of the show was shaky, and ultimately just disrupted the pacing of the show even more. One last complaint I would like to mention is Hiroyuki Imaishi's style of animation. Imaishi is my favorite anime director, and that's because of the absolutely absurd plot lines and imaginative style, colors, and camera angles he adds into everything he makes. But during the opening fight of the show in Main's final stand, I could not tell what was happening on screen half of the time. The style he has is both his biggest strength and weakness. He can absolutely craft amazing, beautiful scenes that are both absurd and artful at the same time, resulting in the scene being burned into the viewer's head, either due to awe or hype. But in the pursuit of this, he can sometimes overdo it, especially in fast-paced fights, or when there are a lot of characters in the scene, and I think he showcased that flaw in Edgerunners one too many times. I guess you could argue it encourages rewatchability, but I don't know, maybe it's just me. I simply could not keep up as fast as others, but I just figured I'd bring it up just in case anyone else felt the same way. So where does that bring us? Is Edgerunners overrated and just another bandwagon anime for YouTubers to milk for views and Cyberpunk 2077 fans to use as an excuse to say,
well, Cyberpunk 2077 was actually always good and I have defended it since day one, therefore my credibility in all things Cyberpunk related is superior and unquestionable.
Well, actually, yeah, it's going to be both of those things regardless, and maybe it's just a bit overrated, but it still deserves all the praise and attention it's getting. Edgerunners is a tragic, cautionary tale full of style, originality, passion, and most importantly, the audacity to be different. I think we can all agree that anime has fallen into like 3 story types. You have rom-com with an insufferable protagonist and a waifu to set the internet ablaze. Isekai with a unique protagonist venturing on a vague quest with a harem following his lead. And generic protagonist who has a special ability that makes him the only one who can save the world. This show is the closest to the third option, with the main character being special, but this world is not savable. The city itself is the villain, and even though David is very powerful, his rebellious nature goes against a world that punishes those who become too ambitious, or stands out from the rest of the crowd for too long, doomed him from the start, and all we can do is watch. The show is closer to a rags to riches story that follows a good person who has to become a monster in order to survive as long as possible. David is not a hero, he is more akin to a terrorist. He kills innocent people, causes wide-scale destruction, and uses his money for himself rather than try to make Night City a better place. In the beginning of the show, we see a kind-hearted rebel, and by the end he's causing wide-scale destruction and killing countless amounts of people who at the end of the day are just doing their jobs. Like, take the medical team who are going to take Faraday, for example. Instead of just killing Faraday, he instead kills them so that he can keep Faraday and give him a more painful, agonizing death. All that hard work that his mother put in for him to live a decent life was ultimately in vain because David doesn't listen to anyone's advice. He became a person who would cause destruction for his own or select few others' gain. Just like the gang who did the very same thing that indirectly led to his mother's death. And despite all that, we keep rooting for him. That's good writing. This show broke the mold that most modern anime fall in. It may not have had the most complex plot or masterful writing, but it made us care and feel. Most of this video has been negative, but I believe if fictional characters in a fictional world can make a real person feel strong emotions like this anime did, then what you're watching is a paragon of what the medium is supposed to be. It's beautiful to watch. The intense moments hook your attention. the unceremonious and brutal death of characters that we've grown to care about makes those stakes feel more real, and any feeling of plot armor is discarded. And above all, the show had the guile to end in the most believable way possible, which we can all agree just made the impression left by it all that much more everlasting. Edgerunners' greatest flaw is that it was rushed. And I genuinely believe that the extra 2 episodes that most anime get that this one didn't would have taken place between the time skip, and given the characters and the viewers time to reflect and feel the after effects of what had just happened in the anime up until that point. If that was the case, maybe it would have made me love this show as much as everyone else did. But who knows, maybe this was planned from the start, and those 2 missing episodes will be on a disc set in the future. Edgerunners is far from perfect, but in modern day pop culture where shows and movies don't take risks, are politically motivated by self-righteous writers, directors, and producers, and feel like they are made more to make money than to make the viewer actually feel anything meaningful, Cyberpunk Edgerunners is exemplary in what a product made with integrity, care, and soul look like, and should be the paradigm for media in the years to come.